Mark Twain was born when Halley's Comet passed the Earth, and he died when Halley's Comet passed the Earth. That brings up the question, what will happen when it passes by the Earth again? Find out the answer in a little story I like to call Reports of My Death Have Been Gravely Underestimated.
In all my days, I've never seen a sunset as beautiful as the one in Muscatine, Iowa. They say the sunrise is also beautiful. I do not know, 'cause I kept my lazy ass in bed. I was at the U.S. Capitol in the summer of 2019, and Lucy took my picture by a statue of King Kamehameha, the first king of Hawaii. And there's a portrait of him. There I am with the statue, and then here's the portrait of King Kamehameha. We're going to use what's called the C&P method to pull the argument out of a passage by humorist and writer Mark Twain. In the following passage, Twain argues for a conclusion that most would call racist. Others might contend that the argument and its conclusion are not racist. Later, we'll show that the argument has a false assumption, a false premise. For now, we are just using it as a real-life example of an argument that is hard to pull apart. So how do we figure out what the conclusion and premises are? I don't think much of Hawaiian royalty. Years ago, when the late king and the present king were only princes, youths, they traveled in the U.S. with the premier of the kingdom, Dr. Judd, an American. Some accounts say they went into dinner, but observing their black faces and uninformed of their rank, the steward enforced the rule of the boat, excluding colored persons from the cabin table. They were naturally incensed, and all that could afterwards be done failed to wipe from their minds the affront. Yet at its worst, it was one that only was offered them as unknown and merely private individuals, and being entirely unofficial, could not affect them as princes or their country through them, and should have been so received and so valued. The men were only insulted, not the princes, and thus their country was no more insulted than if the affront had been offered to the commonest in the realm. The king has never forgotten or forgiven that trifling stab at his little vanity. How to pull an argument out of a passage you find in real life, like the Twain passage. The C&P method for finding arguments in a passage. Ask yourself these questions. Number 1, is the passage trying to prove something? If so, the claim it is trying to prove is the conclusion. So as you read through it, ask yourself, what's it trying to prove? What's it trying to prove? Secondly, is evidence or a line of reasoning being given to support that claim, the conclusion? If so, the sentences containing the evidence or reasoning are the premises. So once you figured out what the conclusion is, you can just read back through it and pull out every claim you think is being said in order to support the conclusion. So I'm reading the passage over and over. What's he trying to prove? What's he trying to prove? And the conclusion I come up with is that he's trying to prove that the king should not have seen the insult that happened to him when he was a child as an offense to his country, then the country of Hawaii. He should not have taken the slight as an offense to the country of Hawaii. That's Twain's conclusion. I'm typing in the conclusion at the bottom of my writing space. Therefore, the king of Hawaii should not have taken being forbidden to eat with whites as an insult to his country. Now that I have the conclusion, I need to figure out what the premises are. So by the C&P method, now I say, what are the premises? What's the evidence How do I figure out the evidence that that Twain is giving that the king of Hawaii shouldn't have taken the being kept away from the white people in the restaurant part of the ship's cabin as an insult to the country of Hawaii? Well, what I'll do, I'll just take each piece of evidence. So let me just go through. Let's try this now. Premise 1. The ship's steward was unaware that the king was Hawaiian royalty when he refused to let him dine in the whites-only cabin. Premise 2. So while the steward insulted the king as a person of color by turning him away, he did not insult the country of Hawaii. Conclusion. Therefore, the king of Hawaii should not have taken being forbidden to eat with whites as an insult to his country. So one thing you might notice is that the conclusion, as I've stated it in that last version of the argument, is not explicitly stated in Twain's argument. It's more of an art than a science to reconstruct an argument. And I've taken a kind of complex case, and I've done the best I could with it, but I just wanted you to get the feel for how what's involved in pulling an argument out of a passage. First, find the conclusion. Then once you know what the conclusion is, go back through the passage and look for the pieces of evidence. It is an art, but you want the end result to be such so that if Mark Twain, if we could bring him back from the dead right now and he saw my reconstruction, he would say, brains, I need no. He would say, that really is what I meant. And to put it even into a more clear form, premise 1, if you don't know a person is representing a country, you cannot insult their country by insulting that person. Premise 2, the ship's steward did not know the king of Hawaii was representing Hawaii because he didn't know he was Hawaiian royalty. Conclusion, therefore the ship's steward could not have insulted the country of Hawaii by insulting the king. Oh well, at least Twain is dead now.
Poor Grease. He forgot that Missouri is the show me state.